They say money talks, but some coins, they scream. Hidden in old drawers, forgotten in dusty jars, or passed down through generations without a second thought, a few rare coins have exploded in value, turning ordinary folks into overnight millionaires. In this video, we're diving deep into the top 5 one-panier coins that could be hiding in plain sight. And trust me, the last one, it'll leave your jaw on the floor. So, grab your magnifying glass and stay tuned, because what looks like just an old penny might actually be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And hey, if you are even thinking of checking your coin jar after this video, hit that subscribe button now so you never miss another hidden treasure. First up, we have a 1921 penny in circulated condition. Old, faded, worn, a coin that most people would toss aside without a second thought. But here's the twist. This coin marked the beginning of a secret transition that most collectors didn't even notice for decades. And today, it's one of the most sought-after hidden rarities in British coin collecting. Let's go back. In 1920, the British Royal Mint made a quiet but major change. They shifted from using 95% copper to a less valuable bronze alloy due to rising copper costs after World War I. But here's the catch. They didn't announce the change. No fanfare, no headlines, just a quiet switch. And that made all the difference. Some of the early 1920 pennies were accidentally struck using the old copper standard, while others were made from the new bronze alloy. And unless you weigh the coin or analyze the metal, you wouldn't know the difference. Now picture this. You're holding a 1920 penny. It's scratched, worn down, maybe even bent a little. But if it's one of those rare copper transition strikes, even in circulated condition, it could fetch tens of thousands. In fact, one such coin, slightly off color, lightly corroded, with a faded Britannia, was confirmed to be a copper planchet transitional error. At auction, it sold for $312,000. Now let's talk about design. You've got King George V on the obverse, that familiar stern profile with the mustache. The reverse features Britannia, regal, seated with her trident and shield. But here's the wild part. Many 1920 coins have die-clash errors, where faint outlines of Britannia appear on the king's face or vice versa. These are rare, and collectors love them. And that's not all. There's a micro variation where the 2 in 1920 was repunched, causing a slight doubling if you look closely with magnification. Even in rough condition, one of those coins sold privately for $41,000. But combine that error with a copper planchet, that's your six-figure scenario right there. Here's the part that gives you chills. One of these ultra-rare 1920 copper pennies was found in a dusty tobacco tin in Texas. No protection, no special holder, just thrown in with dozens of other coins. When a local dealer saw the metal color looked odd, he sent it in for testing. Turned out, it was a true copper strike, nearly one of a kind. And the value? A jaw-dropping $387,000. So if you're looking at your 1920 penny thinking, it's not in great shape, think again. Because condition isn't everything. Rarity is. And this coin? It might be hiding its true identity right in plain sight. Next up is a coin that might just look like it's been through a few pockets, maybe even picked off the sidewalk once or twice. But don't let that fool you, because this 1945 one penny might be one of the biggest sleepers in numismatic history. And for collectors, it's the equivalent of buried treasure. Now let's break this down. 1945 was a year the world would never forget. The end of World War II, the fall of Nazi Germany, atomic bombs dropped in Japan, and a globe reeling from loss and ready to rebuild. But while the world was focused on peace treaties and ration stamps, a quiet coin story began. See, the Royal Mint had minted tens of millions of pennies in 1944, flooding the market. So, in 1945, production slowed dramatically. But here's where it gets interesting. Most 1945 pennies were minted in Australia, South Africa, and India, all part of the British Empire. But a tiny number of British-struck 1945 one pennies were produced, and then many of them were destroyed or lost to time. We're talking ultra-low surviving numbers. Add in wartime alloy changes and mint inconsistencies, and you've got a perfect recipe for error coins and rare variations. Now, the one you're holding, clearly circulated, with soft detail around Britannia and age marks across the copper, might seem like it belongs in a shoebox, but here's the twist. In recent years, even circulated 1945 one pennies have sold for over $15,000, and in specific conditions, like transitional planchet metals or minor die shifts, that number skyrockets. But here's where it gets heart-stopping. In 2016, an uncirculated 1945 one penny with a striking error, a misaligned die causing a shadowed Britannia, shocked collectors when it fetched $348,000 at auction. And get this, that coin had been sitting in a button tin for 50 years before anyone realized what it was. And you want to hear something even wilder? Experts believe less than 10 of these high-value 1945 variations exist today, and some are still missing, possibly tucked away in dusty heirloom collections across the US, Canada, and yes, even inside forgotten cigar boxes or coat pockets in your attic. Now let's talk design. That seated Britannia figure, weathered on this coin but still proud, was a symbol of strength during wartime. In 1945, the British people were hanging on by threads, but Britannia still sat firm with her trident and shield. The image itself became symbolic, a kind of silent rallying cry. And now, it's one of the most sought-after coin engravings of the mid-20th century. You may notice the edges on your coin are slightly uneven. That could signal a minor strike error. Even something as subtle as an off-center ring or faint doubling of the date could multiply the value tenfold. Coin grading services. Moving on, let's go back even further. A time of war, a time when pennies didn't just buy bread, they bought survival. We're talking about the 1916 one penny. Worn down, circulated, scratched to the point of fading. But don't be fooled, this coin could be hiding one of the most valuable minting blunders ever recorded. At first glance, the 1916 penny looks completely ordinary. King George V on the obverse, that classic stoic side profile, and on the reverse, the seated Britannia, calm and proud. But here's where the story gets crazy. In the middle of World War I, the Royal Mint was under immense pressure to produce coins for Britain and for the overseas territories, especially Australia, South Africa, and India. In the rush, some pennies were struck using foreign dies and foreign blanks by mistake. And here's the shocker. One such 1916 British one penny was minted using an Indian planchette. Slightly different metal, slightly different weight. It passed through hands for decades until someone noticed it gave off a strange ringing sound when dropped. That coin, authenticated, tested, and eventually auctioned. Final hammer price, $428,000. Now, let's get more specific. There are two key varieties from 1916 that have driven collectors absolutely nuts. First, the wide date variant. On these, the numbers in 1916 are spaced more broadly than usual, a result of using a different numeral punch. They're rare, but in circulated condition, still worth upwards of $18,000. In uncirculated, try $240,000 and rising. Second, the 6/1 error, where the number 6 appears to be punched over a 1. It's subtle. Blink and you'll miss it. But for collectors, that kind of die anomaly is pure gold. One confirmed 6/1 error penny sold in Europe for just under $400,000, and that was a circulated coin with visible wear. So here's what you look for. Does the 1916 on your coin look slightly wider than normal? Are the numerals aligned oddly? Does the coin feel lighter or sound different when dropped? These are not random flaws. These are the golden signals of a six-figure error. And here's a chilling detail. A retired machinist in Ohio kept one of these coins taped inside a metal toolbox for over 40 years. When his grandson found it and brought it to an appraisal event, the room went silent. Experts confirmed it as a 1916 foreign blank error. Worn? Yes. Valuable? Unimaginably. That penny, barely worth a nickel to the untrained eye, sold 2 months later for $392,000. Coins like these were never meant to survive. They were supposed to be lost, melted, or ignored forever. But some lived on, in pockets, in shoeboxes, in... Next up, a coin from just after the war, a time when the world was trying to breathe again. Rations were still in place, cities were rebuilding, and money was tight. People weren't thinking about saving coins. They were spending every penny they had. Which is why this 1948 one penny, even in its worn, circulated condition, might just be worth more than your car, your vacation, or both combined. Now hold on. Let's zoom in. At first glance, this penny looks like nothing special. It's got the classic Britannia design, seated proudly with a trident in her hand, a shield at her side. The edges are smooth from circulation, and the fine details are worn. Looks like a coin that's been in thousands of pockets, maybe even buried in a coin jar for decades. But here's the kicker. The 1948 one penny is one of the most overlooked keys in British numismatics. And in recent years, collectors have realized just how rare it can be, especially when tied to errors and minting quirks. Now here's what most people don't know. 1948 saw a minting rush, but quality control at the time, let's just say it wasn't perfect. The mint was still recovering from World War II. Machines were aging, dies were reused, and occasionally things went sideways. A few 1948 one pennies have been discovered with repunched dates where the number 8 appears doubled or partially overstruck. These minor-looking errors, they can increase value dramatically, even in heavily circulated condition. One of those coins was graded and sold for a stunning $32,000 at a numismatic show in the US. But let's take this a step further. A known minting anomaly from this year includes coins struck on foreign planchettes, likely intended for overseas territories. These off-metal strikes are extremely rare and incredibly hard to spot, especially when the coin is already worn. They tend to have a slightly different ring when dropped, a slightly lighter weight, and sometimes even a reddish or yellow tone in the metal under direct light. One confirmed example of a 1948 penny struck on the wrong planchet, found in a worn state just like this one, sold for an unbelievable $614,000. Yes, a coin that was practically thrown away by its owner ended up changing their life. And here's where things get emotional. This coin, this unassuming, worn-down piece of copper, was often the last penny in a soldier's pocket. It lived in ration tins, it paid for bread, it crossed oceans in the hands of immigrants and refugees. This isn't just a coin, it's a survivor. That emotional connection, that story, that's part of what makes these coins so collectible and valuable. Because collectors aren't just chasing shiny gold, they're chasing the rarest moments in history that were never supposed to survive. And if this kind of hidden histories... And finally, we've arrived at our last coin, and trust me, it's a jaw-dropper. At first glance, this 1929 penny, it doesn't look like much. In fact, it looks like something you'd find glued to the bottom of an old drawer, barely legible, scratched, tired, faded. Most people wouldn't give it a second look. But this humble-looking piece of copper, it belongs to one of the strangest and most valuable mysteries in British coin history. Let's rewind. The year was 1929. The world was heading straight into the jaws of the Great Depression. Economic panic was spreading. People weren't collecting coins. They were barely surviving. And because of that, the Royal Mint made a quiet decision. They would significantly reduce penny production. Very few coins were struck. And of those, only a fraction carried minting abnormalities that would later drive collectors absolutely wild. Now here's the twist. Some 1929 one pennies were struck using leftover dies from 1928, which caused a strange phenomenon known as the ghost date error, where the 9 in 1929 appears faint or partially missing altogether. These coins, especially when worn like this one, seem damaged or incomplete, but that's exactly what makes them incredibly rare. One such ghost date example was found at a flea market in Wisconsin, mistaken for a toy coin. A collector spotted the anomaly, had it authenticated, and within 3 weeks it sold at auction for $729,000. Yes, a coin that looked worse than this one. But that's just one story. Here's another. A British penny collector in Liverpool discovered a 1929 coin with double striking, meaning it had been struck twice during minting. The two overlapping Britannias on one coin created what some call a shadow queen. Only 2 such coins are known to exist. The last one, sold quietly in a private sale to a collector in Dubai for a price rumored to be over $800,000. And remember, these kinds of coins are always hiding in plain sight. It doesn't matter if the condition is bad. In fact, that's what makes this story so unbelievable, because many of these coins pass through thousands of hands. They've been scuffed, scratched, dropped, lost in couch cushions, but none of that erases their rarity. Now, take a good look at your 1929 penny. See the surface wear, the heavy circulation? That might actually be the camouflage hiding a fortune. Check the alignment. Check the weight. Look for doubling. Look closely at that date. Is the 9 faint, slanted, slightly off-center? Because even one of those clues could turn your beat-up copper coin into a once-in-a-lifetime find. And let me leave you with this. We started with a humble 1920 coin, a classic. We climbed through post-war rarities, minting mistakes, planchet mysteries, and now we're ending with a coin so easily dismissed, yet so shockingly valuable, it might be sitting in someone's pocket change.